It was the Zodiac's cat and mouse game with the public and the police that sparked such a high level of intrigue. Experts to this day have not mastered his codes and have really no idea how many lives the Zodiac has claimed. But one thing they do know is who the chief suspects in the case are.
2,500. That's the number of people who have been formally investigated as potential Zodiac suspects since 1969. If I had $1 for every suspect, I'd certainly go on a cruise, maybe with a drink package. 2,500 names and faces and fingerprints, handwriting samples, alibis, and filing cabinets after filing cabinet. And that's just the official count. This is just the ones the police actually looked at because guess what? There's online forums and lots of amateur researchers, and that you can probably triple that. Somewhere north of 7,000 people have been pointed at as a Zodiac by someone who was sure they had the right guy. Or at least none of them have been proven right, which in this case and in life is basically the same thing.
Now, 50 new names are proposed every year, every single year. So the case has been open for 57 years. And when you do that math, you're somewhere around 2,800 additional people that have officially been nominated for Zodiac since the investigation started. And now I promise that wasn't girl math I just did because nothing is on sale when we're talking Zodiac.
That's right. It's not Target, baby.
Now, out of all these people, not one of them has been charged. There's been not one conviction, not one definitive answer.
And this is the finale. 4 long episodes in, we have the attacks, the letters, the ciphers, all the investigators who fell apart like a cornbread muffin trying to solve this case.
A cornbread muffin?
Cornbread muffin. They're very crumbly.
Okay. Wow.
And there is evidence that has survived 57 years, but it's in degraded state, and it still hasn't given a person, a place, or a thing, or a proper noun. Today, we get to the names anyway. The suspects. The people who came close enough to the profile that serious investigators took a look at them. And then, because this case cannot end without something brand new shadow dropping in your lap, we have a December 2025 development that connects the Zodiac to a murder that happened 22 years before the first confirmed attack, and who you may know from one of our previous stories. And this names 2 completely different people as a culprit, depending on which investigator you ask, and also me or Kathryn. So stay tuned to the end. The bitter, bitter, murderous end.
Sneaky footsteps in the night, clues that vanish out of sight. Grab your hat and magnifying glass. We'll talk this case and have a blast. Mugshot Mysteries, we're on the trail. Twists and turns that never fail. Laughs and chills, it's quite the show. Who did it? Tune in to know.
Welcome back to Mugshot Mysteries. I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Gabriel. This is part 4, the last one. Let's see if we can sully land this plane.
30-second version for anyone who needs the perfectly chiropractic spine of this before we get into the names. Late 1960s, Northern California, 5 confirmed dead, 2 survivors, 4 attacks, 1 killer, at least 4 jurisdictions, and not 1 successful prosecution. Fubar for sure. He wrote over 20 letters, sent 4 ciphers, and built a media presence that made him the most famous uncaught serial killer in American history. The Z408, the Z stuff is how they categorize this, was cracked in 20 hours by a school teacher's wife, who is, by my account, a BAMF, which is a badass motherfucker for people who don't know. The Z340 took 51 years and 3 civilians on a pandemic video call. And the Z13, 13 characters prefaced with, "My name is," has never been officially solved. The investigators who got closest to this case, Toski, Avery, Graysmith, all paid for it in ways that had nothing to do with the Zodiac directly. The case is officially opened. The primary suspects are dead, and the DNA sample from the letters is partial, degraded, and hasn't matched anyone.
That's 57 years in 30 seconds. Good job, Abe.
Thank you. I was kind of winded.
Yeah, no, that was like the rap god of recaps.
Ooh.
Now let's spend some time on the men who almost answered the question because the cut of the jib was nearly Zodiac size.
Now, if you've seen the David Fincher film, you already know this name. If you spent any time on a Zodiac forum and you know who you are, you've already read approximately 10,000 words about Arthur Leigh Allen. He is the gravitational center of this case. The suspect so circumstantially aligned with the profile that the investigation effectively organized itself around him for decades. Some would say all stars pointed at him, and he is also the man whose DNA did not match the Zodiac letters and whose fingerprints did not match the crime scenes. So let's hold both of those things at the same time and weigh them out like Lady Justice.
Arthur Leigh Allen was born in 1933. Former Navy man, unfortunately for all those other Navy men out there. Former school teacher. He was also a convicted child molester.
Ugh.
Yep. And in 1975, he spent time at Atascadero State Hospital. He lived in Vallejo, then in Santa Rosa. He was, by counts of everyone who knew him, deeply unsettling in a way that's kind of hard to pin down specifically. Just kind of the person you immediately want to get away from, even though he might not be waving a knife. He's waving a secret red flag that says, something is deeply wrong with me. Please punch me in the nose. But as we have said before, just because you're weird, it doesn't make you bad. But in this case, we do have a child molesting school teacher at best. At worst, we got the Zodiac. So it really could be two wrongs equals this asshole.
That's the best way to describe it. I want to punch this man in the face. Now, the case for Allen starts before any of the attacks. His acquaintance, Don Chaney, has stated that in late 1968, Allen told him he wanted to hunt human beings for a sport, that he planned to shoot couples at lovers' lanes and leave notes on cars, that he called himself Zodiac, a name that he'd taken from a watch brand that he liked. This conversation allegedly happened before the Lake Herman road attack in December 1968. Now, if Chaney's account is accurate, Allen was describing the Zodiac's actual methodology before the Zodiac existed.
So let's go over this a little bit again. And let's talk about the bong-sized smoke cloud surrounding this guy. He owned a Zodiac brand dive watch with a cross-circle logo on the face. Before the Zodiac adopted this symbol, he had access to a trailer near Lake Berryessa. And this is, of course, one of the locations of one of the attacks. He made statements to other acquaintances about the Zodiac case that, in retrospect, read a little bit too informed. And some handwriting analysts found similarities between his writing and the Zodiac letters.
Now, Detective Dave Toschi pursued Allen harder than anyone. There were multiple searches of his property, repeated interviews. It was constant pressure.
Some might say he was under pressure.
Yes, some would say that. They might also sing it as well, but I'm not going to do that. But you guys at home definitely should be doing it. But regardless of said pressure, Allen denied everything, every time, which ain't too surprising. And the hard evidence never aligned with the suspicion. Fingerprints that were lifted from the letters and the Paul sign cab didn't match Allen. A DNA profile developed from the stamps and the envelope flaps on the Zodiac correspondence also didn't match Allen. He passed the polygraph examination, which is inadmissible, but still a data point. Now, he died in August 1992, which was 16 years before the Fincher film came out, before genetic genealogy existed, and before anyone had a definitive answer.
So here's an interesting thought. If Arthur Leigh Allen was not the Zodiac, what does this mean for the investigation? Because the investigation wasn't just looking at Allen, it was shaped by Allen. The filing cabinets Toschi filled were basically all labeled Arthur Leigh Allen as fucking guilty. It was the only working theory. Resources that might have gone towards other viable leads were pointed at a man whose physical evidence consistently came back negative. He wasn't innocent of being a garbage human, but if he was innocent of being the Zodiac, the real one may have spent decades just doing a slow jitterbug in the mirror as celebration.
And if he was guilty, then either the DNA and fingerprints were planted or contaminated, or the forensic methods of the era were flawed in ways that we can't account for, or he was extraordinarily careful in ways that are consistent with everything else we know about how the Zodiac operated. The answer is still, 57 years later, we don't know. Allen is a psychological Rorschach test. You see what you're looking for. And most people saw a really off-putting man who had extraordinary circumstantial evidence wrapped around him like a tent pole. Allen isn't the only name, though. He's just the loudest one. There are others who came close enough to the evidence or the geography that serious people took them seriously. And one of them was pointed at not by a detective, not by a researcher, but by his own son. Dun, dun, dun.
So let's talk about some other names because there are other suspects. Lawrence Kane. He is a suspect who deserved more attention than he got. And the reason he didn't get it just might be as simple as Allen taking up all the available serial killing oxygen in the room. Kane lived in the same Vallejo neighborhood as Darlene Ferrin, and she is the victim of the Blue Rock Springs attack. He matched the composite sketch from the Paul Stein witnesses. And then there's this. Remember Officer Don Folk? He was one of the 2 officers who walked past the Zodiac on the street after the Stein murder. Part of that terrible dispatch error we covered in part 1. Yeah, he said that of the hundreds of suspect photographs he was shown over 20 years, Lawrence Kane was the closest match. Now, that's a huge statement from someone who actually saw the, not black man they should have been looking for.
Now, Kane had a documented brain injury from a car accident that researchers have connected to behavioral changes consistent with disinhibition. He moved to South Lake Tahoe in 1970, which, if you'll remember, was the same year Donna Lass, the nurse the Zodiac referenced in his 1971 postcard, disappeared from that area. Now, her body was never found. Kane died in 2010 and was never charged, never formally named a primary suspect the way that Allen was, despite the Folk identification being arguably more concrete than most of what's in the Allen file.
Kane is the answer to the question of, what happens when a case has a famous suspect and you become the middle child of the investigation? Allen got the book. Allen got the movie. Kane got a footnote in other people's chapters. He's like the niche suspect, man. He's the vinyl. He's so ironic. And the Folk identification from the only person known to have seen the Zodiac face to face and survive just sits in a file, lonely.
Okay. Well, now we also have Earl Van Best Jr., who is the suspect named in the 2014 book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All. And the author of that book is Gary Stewart, who is Van Best's biological son.
Dun, dun, dun.
Exactly. So Stewart was adopted as an infant and spent decades searching for his birth father. And when he finally found him and started researching his history, he became convinced he had found the Zodiac. He published the book. It hit the New York Times bestseller list, and then Netflix made a documentary about it.
Like they do.
Like they do.
The evidence against him. Van Best bore a visual resemblance to the Stein composite sketch, which I have to admit, I've seen the pictures, and he looks like the most run-of-the-mill white guys. He looks so white that, I'll take this a little from Cat Williams, he comes from the land of Caucasia, from the Caucasus Mountains. But again, I'll give it this. He does bear a resemblance. I'm sure Kathryn will get some pics up for review.
Absolutely.
His name fits the character count of the Z13 cipher. But so does names like Robert Smithy or Gerald Stevens. And early handwriting analysts appeared to link his writing to the Zodiac letters, specifically a sample from his marriage certificate. But guess what? Here's the problem with that handwriting match. That writing on the marriage certificate turned out to be of the officiating priest, not Van Best. It doesn't appear that the priest was ever found to have a murderous past, so the portion of evidence was definitely a nothing burger. Private investigators hired by Netflix to fact-check Stewart's book, they debunked significant portions of his claims, which seems to fit anytime someone writes a book for, money. And lastly, documentary evidence placed Van Best in Europe during some of the Zodiac's California activity.
But the psychological layer of that story doesn't disappear just because the evidence didn't hold up. A man spends years searching for his biological father. He finds him, he researches him, and he becomes convinced his father was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. That is its own story, separate from whether Van Best was guilty. The need to find the meaning in an origin, even a terrible one, well, that's something the Zodiac's case keeps producing in the people it touches.
And then we have another suspect. In 2021, a group called the Case Breakers went public with the name Gary Francis Poste. Now, the Case Breakers aren't internet forum people just making dick jokes. They're 41 plus former law enforcement officials, they're academics, and they're investigative journalists who have spent years working on this collectively. So a fancy group that might have some bloodletting ceremonies to get in. Who knows? They claim Poste, who died in 2018, had a history of violence, had allegedly trained younger followers to be, in their words, killing machines, and that his name could be decoded from the Zodiac ciphers. They also pointed to the forehead scars on the composite sketch as matching scars Poste had.
Now, the problems. No witnesses ever described the Zodiac as having forehead scars. The FBI and the SFPD did not confirm the casebreaker's finding. Established Zodiac researchers were skeptical, and some very publicly so. The casebreakers are a serious group, and their process deserves respect. The fact that 40 experienced investigators reviewed this case and landed on a conclusion that law enforcement didn't confirm tells you more about how difficult the evidence is to work with than it does about the credibility of the people doing the working.
Which brings us to what dropped in December of 2025.
Dun dun dun.
And I want to say up front, this is the freshest material in 4 episodes of fresh material. The investigation is still ongoing. Law enforcement is still reviewing it. Nothing has been confirmed, but the claim itself is extraordinary enough and the evidence trail behind it is specific enough that sitting here in 2026 without talking about it would be like covering the Zodiac and skipping all those terrible misspellings in his letters.
Ugh.
A man shouldn't spell Christmas like that is all I'm saying. He did it with multiple S's.
Lots of S's.
This new development is like, you know, like when Unsolved Mysteries used to do that dramatic update at the end of the episode when they got more information.
That was
you remember that?
That was my favorite part. So exciting.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is that.
Okay, you guys ready? Here is what emerged in December 2025. And here is why it sent the Zodiac research community into a full spiral. Because it doesn't just name a new suspect, it connects this case to a murder that happened in 1947, 21 years before the first confirmed Zodiac attack. Now, this is the one that I'm pretty amped about. January 15th, 1947. A mother taking her child for a morning walk in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles stops at an empty lot. In the lot is the body of a young woman. She's naked. She's been cut cleanly in half at the waist. Her body has been completely drained of blood and then posed. Her face has been carved into a glass-skull smile from ear to ear. The bisection is so surgically precise that investigators immediately concluded the person who did this had significant medical training. The cut is between the second and third lumbar vertebrae, a procedure that requires anatomical knowledge that most people simply don't have.
The victim's name was Elizabeth Short. And I'm going to give you a 20-second recap, like Kathryn. So, ready, go. We did discuss Elizabeth in the Black Dahlia pod, but to give you a recap, she was 22 years old. She was an aspiring actress from Massachusetts. The tabloid press called her the Black Dahlia after a film noir playing at the time and her habit of wearing black. Her murder has never been officially solved. It has generated over 150 confessions in the weeks after it happened, all of them false, because sometimes people just want to be famous. These were the early nutso influencers wannabes. 22 primary suspects were investigated. None were charged, and for 78 years, it sat beside the Zodiac case as California's other great unsolvable. Because Southern California is supposed to be chill and relaxed, but it certainly seems to produce some killers.
For sure.
Maybe sunshine isn't good for the murder gene, who knows?
I mean, that could be your thesis in college. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, we got the Golden State one to add to the list.
Yes. Okay. But the theory that the Black Dahlia murder and the Zodiac killings are connected, that they share a perpetrator, is not new. What's new in December 2025 is who the perpetrator is and the specifics of the evidence trail behind the identification.
Let's talk about Marvin Margolis. Alex Baber is a 50-year-old self-described autistic codebreaker from West Virginia who has spent 4 years working exclusively on this case. He runs a firm called Cold Case Consultants of America. In December 2025, he published his findings in the Los Angeles Times and his conclusion: the Zodiac killer and the Black Dahlia murder are the same man. And his name is Marvin Skipton Margolis, also known for decades as Marvin Merrill.
Now here is the Margolis timeline, because the timeline is the argument. Margolis was born in Chicago in 1925. He joined the Navy in 1943 and served as a corpsman, which is a military medic, with the 1st Marine Division in the Pacific Theater. He participated in the Battle of Okinawa, And at some point during his service, he was buried alive in a cave and forced to dig himself out, which is fucking horrific.
Yep.
Now, when he was eventually evaluated for a medical discharge, Navy officials described him as resentful and aggressive. He was denied the position he wanted in a surgical unit. He left the Navy on 50% mental disability grounds, and he came home carrying a Japanese military rifle and a bayonet with a wooden sheath.
Like you do. After his discharge, Margolis moved to Los Angeles and enrolled as a pre-med student at the University of Southern California in 1946. His first assignment? Dissecting a human corpse, because a research paper was apparently not good enough. He was 21 years old and had just survived being buried alive in a Pacific war zone. And he had anatomical training, both military and academically, and a documented pattern of resentment towards authority. And he was now living in the same city as Elizabeth Short. The two of them had a relationship. It was a brief, apparently volatile one. Short confided in friends that she was afraid of a jealous ex-boyfriend, which, to be fair, is like 85% of relationships.
Yep.
You gotta work through it, folks. Communication is key. Anyways, in October 1946, they lived together for 12 whole days in a Hollywood Boulevard apartment, which was apparently enough time to discern that they were really shitty roommates. That was October, but in January 1947, Short's body was tragically found, and it was bisected with surgical precision in a vacant lot, which is just really eerie and almost uncanny.
Now, when police began investigating, Marvin Margolis, then still going by Marvin Merrill, was on a short list of primary suspects. He was questioned. He initially denied living with Short, though he later admitted it. He was on the Los Angeles County grand jury list of 22 primary suspects in the 1949 to 1950 investigation. And then, as the case just exploded in the press, he left Los Angeles. He moved through Chicago, Atlanta, Kansas, Arizona. He changed his name legally from Merrill back to Margolis, or rather, he had been using Merrill as an alias, and the movement between identities became a documented trail that investigators followed years later. He is described in accounts from this period as hungry for attention, prone to elaborate lies, someone who claimed, in a Kansas newspaper article, to have studied under Salvador Dali and his mustache.
He resurfaces in California, as people seem to be apt to do.
Mm-hmm.
Not immediately. There is a gap in the public record. But investigators place him back in the state in the years before the first confirmed Zodiac murders in December of 1968. He ran a restaurant at Atascadero. He worked as an engineer at Intel in Santa Clara. He ran an automotive repair shop in Oceanside in the early 1970s. And he even received a jail term and probation for defrauding customers. Now, all I'm saying is a working resume of restaurant owner, Intel engineer, and auto repair shop. There might be some follow-up questions for him when he applied for a new job. He died of cancer in Santa Barbara in July of 1993. Now, his gravestone at Riverside National Cemetery reads Margolis. He is buried under his original name.
Now, here is what Baber found. He spent 9 months working 18 to 20-hour days on the Z13 cipher.
Yeesh.
So, using AI tools, newly released census records, and classical cryptography methodology, he arrived at a 13-character solution, Marvin Merrill, the alias Margolis used for decades. The name he was known by during the years he lived in Los Angeles before and after the Short murder.
Former NSA chief codemaker and codebreaker, because those do go hand in hand. You know, like the whole, I brought you into this world and I can take you out.
Yes.
Ed Giorgio reviewed Baber's work and said, yeah, it checks out. A second former NSA crypto-mathematician, Patrick Henry, separately found another link. The Zodiac cipher appears to have been generated using the keyword Elizabeth. Not a common word, not a random one, Elizabeth. The name of the woman Margolis was accused of killing 22 years before the first Zodiac attack.
And then there's the drawing. In his final years, dying of cancer in Santa Barbara, Marvin Margolis produced a sketch. He gave it to his son. The sketch is titled Elizabeth. It depicts a woman naked from the waist up. One nipple appears severed. The torso has marks consistent with stab wounds. And hidden in the shading of the drawing, not immediately visible, requiring close examination, is the word Zodiac. A dying man's sketch titled Elizabeth with a severed nipple and the word Zodiac in the shadows given to his child. whatever you think about your father, that picture is going to have to reframe a few thoughts about him.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Now, I'm quite sure what the kid was looking for was a more traditional inheritance, like gold, silver, maybe a quarter collection.
Yeah, like some stocks, some bonds.
Right? They got that.
So Baber also believes he identified the location of Short's murder, a motel in Compton at 2615 Santa Fe Avenue. This is one of the few establishments in the area in 1947 with a bathtub. Though probably not advertised as such, it could be used for draining and cleaning a body. Newspaper accounts from the time describe a nervous young man driving between motels that night before Short's body was found, and they were looking specifically for a room with a bathtub. They claimed his wife needed it, and the Compton bungalow complex at the address was reportedly called, hold down your conspiracy hats.
Holding.
At the time, it was called the Zodiac Motel, which is pretty freaky.
I mean, shut up. That gets me so excited. You have no idea. Okay. So Baber presented his findings to the interagency group with jurisdiction over the Zodiac crimes, the SFPD, Napa County Sheriff, Solano County Sheriff, and the FBI. So members of his team also met with the LAPD police chief, retired LAPD homicide detective Rick Jackson, who spent his career at both LAPD and the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office and led the department's cold case team. He reviewed the evidence and said, in my opinion, these are solved cases. There are too many links. There's overwhelming circumstantial evidence. He's left breadcrumbs all along. Retired LAPD cold case detective Mitzi Roberts, who had directly worked the Black Dahlia cold case, said Margolis had always been among the top suspects, but got pushed aside because of mistaken assumptions about Short's final days.
Now, Margolis' son, for his part, told the press that the theory was speculative cesspool and said that there was just no way his father did it, which is exactly what Van Best's son said and exactly what you would expect a man's son to say too, and what my son better say when I shift careers. It doesn't really resolve anything.
Okay, and then there's the skeptics. Larry Harnish, a former Los Angeles Times editor who has researched the Black Dahlia case since the 1990s, noted that the LAPD did interview and clear Margolis, though that report didn't include details of his alibi. Critics of Baber's methodology have said he worked backwards, arrived at a conclusion first, and built an explanation to fit it, which is, not coincidentally, the exact criticism leveled at Gray Smith's book about Allen 40 years ago. The FBI has not confirmed the Z13 solution, and the case remains officially open.
And guess what?
What?
Here's where this case proves it has more layers than Rachel Green's haircut. Because the Margolis theory is not the only theory connecting the Zodiac to the Black Dahlia. There's another one, an older one, and the person who proposed it is a former LAPD homicide detective who named his own father. This is one you cannot miss.
No, you can't. And I have done a deep search on it, and it is already on our socials, so check it out. Steve Hodel spent 25 years as an LAPD homicide detective. After his father George died in 1999, Steve began going through his belongings and found photographs that he believed included Elizabeth Short. He began investigating, and he published his first book, Black Dahlia Avenger, in 2003. It became a New York Times bestseller, and it also named his father, Dr. George Hill Hodel, as the Black Dahlia killer.
George Hodel is one of the genuinely strangest human beings to appear in any story we have told on this show. And we really like weird people as much as Tim Burton. So that's saying something. He graduated high school at 15. He was expelled from Caltech at 16 for having an affair with a professor's wife, which damn, and getting her pregnant. Double damn. He was a physician, eventually a psychiatrist. He was also, according to Steve's research, a devoted surrealist who surrounded himself with artists and intellectuals and threw drug-fueled parties at one of the most unusual private homes in Los Angeles. Now, this was a house designed by Lloyd Wright, which is the son of Frank Lloyd Wright, to look like a Mayan temple. Guests included Man Ray. John Hudson was once his brother-in-law. These sound like parties you walk out of the next day with needle holes and a limp.
Now, this is disturbing. In 1949, George Hodel was tried for raping his own teenage daughter, Tamar. 2 witnesses present in the room confirmed seeing it happen. Now, he was acquitted because the city of Los Angeles in 1949 was a place where a well-connected physician with a powerful social network could apparently do almost anything. He left the country not long after, moving to Hawaii and then the Philippines, where he would remain largely for the next 4 decades.
While the investigation into the Black Dahlia murder was still active in 1950, the LAPD and the district attorney's office had wiretapped George Hodell's home for over a month. The transcripts were buried for decades. When they were finally surfaced in 2003, they contained this: some really dark villainy monologuing. George Hodell, in conversation with an unidentified visitor, was recorded saying, and I'm going to read this carefully, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary."
I can't handle how you read that.
The LAPD ultimately did clear him, somehow, because that's how things work. Power and money and prestige and all that, what those things give you is anonymity. Well, those transcripts were buried. His son spent 20 years arguing that clearing him was a mistake. His own son. If your son is exasperated by your own acquittal, you have done something horribly wrong.
Correct. In a follow-up book called Most Evil, Steve Hodell extended his argument. He proposed that his father didn't stop with the Black Dahlia, that George Hodell, living in the Philippines and traveling back to the United States regularly through the 1960s, returned to California specifically to commit the Zodiac murders. That the same man who may have bisected Elizabeth Short in 1947 sent taunting letters to Bay Area newspapers in 1969. Steve's evidence for the Zodiac connection includes handwriting analysis and cipher interpretation that most established Zodiac researchers consider a significant overreach.
Now, Steve Hodell and Alex Baber agree on the main point. They both believe that the Zodiac killer and the Black Dahlia killer are the same person. They have both spent years building that case. Their evidence points in the same direction on the core question and to completely different people on the identity. But like a Protestant versus Catholic thing, one says Marvin Margolis, one says George Hodell. And the interesting thing is that both of these suspects had medical training, documented connections to Elizabeth Short, and the California geography that aligns them with the Zodiac crimes. It's really nuts. You got two guys with a series of talents that are just like way out of the league of the average human being. They agree on the same killer theory, and that's what's really interesting. There seems to be enough evidence between the cases that say, yeah, regardless of whom you think did it, it was only one guy who did both.
Now, George Hodell died in 1999. Marvin Margolis died in 1993. Both are beyond reach of any prosecution. Whatever the truth is about either of them, it will have to emerge from documents, DNA, and cipher analysis rather than from anything either man will ever say. All right, we've now spent 4 episodes walking through every piece of evidence that exists on this case, plus a handful of pieces that may or may not exist depending on which cryptographer you trust. We've had a rule since part 1 that we weren't going to tell you what we think until the end. Welcome to the end. Gabriel's going first because he asked nicely, and because once I start on Margolis, he's going to have to fight me. The floor is yours.
Weird ass Dr. George Hodell. That is my answer, and let me tell you why. Let's forget the Zodiac piece for a second. Let's start with the Black Dahlia because that's my son of my entire theory. The gravitational pull comes from there. George Hodell, on a police wiretap, in his own voice, said the words, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." You don't get evidence cleaner than a suspect on tape casually admitting to a murder and then following up with, "Maybe I did kill my secretary." That is a man who knows the statute of limitation doesn't apply to murder and who also knows that the LAPD doesn't particularly want to catch him. He's almost bored when he says it. Like it's a Tuesday, like it's a grocery list where he's reminding himself he needs Metamucil. That is, to me, a confession. Now, layer on top of that, a surgeon. Who matches a bisection cut? A man with documented history of extreme sexual violence against his own daughter, which speaks to the capability and that he was a horrible human being. A man with an ego to live in a house shaped like a Mayan temple and throw man rape parties, which speaks to the kind of performant, look at me personality that would write 20 letters to a newspaper 20 years later. And a man whose own son, and he's a homicide detective with 25 years of experience, looked at the evidence and said, yeah, this was my father. Most sons don't wake up and figure they should try to out their fathers for horrific murders because come on now, how many Christmases could a father screw up to make a son hate him so? Now, to the Zodiac. If George Hodel killed Elizabeth Short in 1947 and he got away with it clean, what do you think a man like that does for the next 20 years? You think he just stops? Guys like Hodel don't stop. They escalate, or they relocate, or they go quiet and come back. And Hodel did exactly that. Philippines for years, back and forth to California, and during one of those back and forth windows, a serial killer just shows up in Northern California who's obsessed with performance, who's obsessed with press, who's obsessed with taunting the police. That is George Hodel's entire personality type. He did not just have the skill set, he had the temperament. The Zodiac isn't just a killer, he's a performer, and George Hodel spent his entire life being a performer who happened to also be a killer.
Now, that was a beautiful speech, and I'm into that theory, don't get me wrong, but you're still wrong.
You're just not that into him?
I'm just not that into him.
Okay.
I don't know if saying I'm into Marvin Margolis is the right way to transition, but here we go. I'm not going to try to talk you out of Hodel for Elizabeth Short because that wiretap is genuinely damning, and I think there's a real argument he was involved in the Dahlia. What I'm going to tell you is why Margolis is the better fit for the Zodiac specifically, and why when you connect those two crimes, Margolis is the one who actually connects them. So start with the Z13. 13 characters. My name is, followed by 13 characters. Marvin Merrill is 13 characters. That is the name Margolis lived under for decades, legally in Los Angeles during and after the Black Dahlia investigation. That's not a coincidence that you can just simply explain away. I mean, you can say Alex Baber worked backwards and built the answer to fit, and fine, that's a fair criticism of his methodology. But the name fits the slot, and the name was the legal alias of a man who was on the grand jury shortlist for the Black Dahlia murder. That's not a stretch. That is a lock and key. And then there's the cipher keyword. According to Patrick Henry, the second NSA cryptomathematician who reviewed the work independently, the Zodiac cipher appears to have been generated using the keyword Elizabeth. Not a random word, not a common cryptographic choice, Elizabeth. This is the name of the woman Margolis was accused of killing. If that analysis holds, and the two former NSA cryptographers say it does, you have a man encoding the name of his first victim into the cipher, announcing his new ones. That is the kind of arrogance that this killer had. That is exactly the move the Zodiac would make. I mean, he couldn't help himself. And then there is the drawing. A dying man, at the end of his life, makes a sketch for his son. The sketch is titled Elizabeth. The woman in it is mutilated in a way consistent with the Black Dahlia crime scene. And then hidden in the shading is the word Zodiac. A man on his deathbed does not hide the word Zodiac in a picture titled Elizabeth unless he wants someone, eventually, to understand what he did. That is a confession. It is the quietest possible confession, but it is a confession. Hodel went on tape. Margolis went on paper. Both men told us who they were. Margolis just did it with more patience. On the medical training piece, which is Gabriel's best argument for Hodel, Margolis has it too. Navy corpsman in the Pacific Theater, pre-med at USC. He dissected a human corpse as his first assignment at 21 years old. The bisection required anatomical knowledge, and Margolis had anatomical knowledge from two different training pipelines, both of which he completed before Elizabeth Short died. Hodel was a surgeon, yes, and that is a strong formal credential, and I'll grant that, but Margolis had enough training to do what was done to Elizabeth Short, and he had something Hodel didn't. He was in a documented 12-day domestic relationship with her in the months before her death. Hodel had proximity. Margolis had motive. And now, I drop my mic.
Good job, babe.
Thanks.
So, let me zoom out for a minute. 4 episodes. We've covered the attacks, the era they happened in. We've covered every letter and cipher in chronological order. We've covered the investigators who gave years to this and came away with less than a pickpocket would if they stole my Velcro wallet. And now we've covered the suspects, the names that serious people have staked serious, real tight collar reputations on, none of which have been confirmed. And I want to say something about what that adds up to, because I think it matters.
Say it.
The Zodiac Killer built the most successful criminal legacy in American history. And he didn't do it with a body count. 5 confirmed dead. Look, there are individual homicides that killed more people, There are serial killers with numbers in the dozens. The Zodiac's confirmed victims are 5. What made him is not what he did, it's what he wrote. He understood, intuitively or deliberately, we'll never know, but that the story would outlast the crimes. That if he controlled the narrative would control the culture. And guess what? He was right. By a margin that I don't even think he could have predicted. This is like the guy who invented Tupperware. You think he ever envisioned boozy parties being thrown over some plastic? No, the Zodiac couldn't have envisioned he'd become this infamous. It was expected, but unexpected as well.
He invented an archetype. Before the Zodiac, serial killers were caught or forgotten. After him, there were killers who communicated. The BTK sent letters. The Unabomber sent a manifesto. The Night Stalker wanted coverage. Every subsequent killer who picked up a pen and addressed it to a newspaper was, whether they knew it or not, working from a playbook the Zodiac wrote in 1969. He made murder into media strategy, and the media strategy worked better than the murders ever could have.
So Dirty Harry came out in 1971, and this is 2 years after the Zodiac's last confirmed attack. The film's villain, Scorpio, is basically the Zodiac. Millions of people who never heard a news report about the actual case were inundated by it by our resident cranky grandpa Clint Eastwood. Gray Smith published his book in 1986. There's a whole generation of true crime readers who are, in my experience, very untrusting of strangers, who built their understanding of the case on Gray Smith's framing. Fincher made his film in 2007 and probably introduced the Zodiac to more people than any news report ever did. It got a Netflix series, which I guess everybody does, but also that 2025 SXSW documentary. Do you know what else it got? This groundbreaking and no-holds-barred podcast. Each new audience is another 50 years of life for the legend of the Zodiac.
And none of it, literally none of it, would have happened if he just killed 5 people and then stopped. What made him immortal was the letters, and he knew that. That was kind of the whole point.
So, here's a question I've been circling since part 1, and I want to land on it like I'm trying to make a baby. Did the Zodiac win?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Gabriel.
That's how babies are made, birds and the bees. Yeah, you got to land on it.
Okay.
So, did the Zodiac win? Because you can define winning in this case 2 ways. You can say he won if he was never caught. And by that definition, 57 years open, primary suspects dead, evidence degraded, no conviction. He was never caught. He won that way in a massive blowout. This is 85 Bears. But there's another definition. Did he also win if we can't stop talking about him? If the game he designed is still running decades after the player put down the controller, if his letters are still the most read mail in Northern California history, sure seems like he won. What is he most proud of? Never getting caught or all the publicity? I mean, I'd probably take freedom. You know, you can be famous, love.
Is it too much for a girl to want both? You know, Dancing with the Stars plug, here we come. But yes, by that definition, he won that too. Because we're sitting here in 2026, 4 episodes deep, with a dedicated audience who showed up every week to read his mail and argue about who he was. That's the game he built. And we are, all of us, still playing it. So whatever the Zodiac built, he built it on those 5 people.
And guess what? The case is open. The name is unknown. The game he designed has now been running for 57 years, like this is The Price is Right. And it shows no sign of ending on its own. Forensic technology is advancing. DNA databases are growing by the Ancestry commercials. Genetic genealogy caught the Golden State Killer after 40 years. The same path exists here. It's less perfect, but it still exists. Whether it leads somewhere is a question for another day, another year, and probably to our AI law enforcement of 2036.
That is fucking terrifying. I don't like that. Now, somewhere in a database, there may be a partial match to a profile extracted from a stamp licked in 1969. Somewhere in an archive, there may be a document that connects a name to a geography in a way that nobody has had the right question to look for yet. And somewhere in a cipher that's 13 characters long, a name may be sitting there that has been read wrong for 50 years. Or it may be exactly what it looks like. The most perfectly designed piece of misdirection in criminal history, built to be unsolvable and engineered to last.
Either way, we're still here. We're still reading his mail. 57 years later, we'd probably be better for it if we could just send it back to the sender. But here we are, nose in them, trying literally every nerdy thing known to man to solve them. So, that is the Zodiac Killer. 4 episodes, 57 years, 5 victims, thousands of suspects, 4 ciphers, 1 confirmed solution that's told us nothing, and a man who turned serial murder into the most durable media strategy in American criminal history and has never been identified. Thank you for being here for all 4 parts. This one was a lot to carry, and it was carried by you as well.
Now, you know where to find us, Instagram and TikTok at Mugshot Mysteries Podcast. And listen, you made it through 4 episodes of ciphers, crime scene bisections, and a dying man's confession sketch. You can survive 30 seconds leaving a 5-star review. I'm not even going to make it a guilt trip. I'm just going to point out that the Zodiac wrote 22 letters with 0 expectation of a reward, and you can't tap 5 stars for us. He had more follow through than that, and he was, allegedly, a serial killer. So the bar is genuinely on the floor. Tap it. It's how people find us. It's how we keep doing this. And frankly, it's the least chaotic thing anyone has done in connection with the case in 57 years. Now, as always, Gabriel, what did we learn across 4 episodes?
Well, we have learned that Kathryn has great plugs. We've learned that obsession is contagious, whether that's Taylor Swift and Jake Gyllenhaal, or Graysmith, Toski, and Avery, and not coincidentally, us. We've learned that murder can be turned performative, and it is this performance that grabs us. Some people need answers, Kathryn, and if a killer like the Zodiac creates intrigue or mystery, it is innate. We want to solve it. What it is sometimes irrelevant as long as there is an it. We've learned that media empires today, influencers, people who want you to watch their life, to know what they're doing, they're no better in their want for attention than the Zodiac. Watch me, the Zodiac cried in ciphers, and we did, and we still do. What act gets the attention seems to be irrelevant to a lot of people out there. And lastly, we have learned that sometimes it's the buildup that matters, because at the end of the day, the Zodiac has never been caught, is most likely dead now, and lived a free life knowing who he was and what he did. He won. And we have to reconcile that sometimes, absurdly, it's evil that finds a way.
Sneaky footsteps in the night, clues that vanish out of sight. Grab your hat and magnifying glass. We'll talk this case and have a blast. Mugshot Mysteries, we're on the trail. Twists and turns that never fail. Laughs and chills, it's quite the show. Who did it? Tune in to know. A stolen gem, a secret note, a shady figure in a trench coat. The clock is ticking, the plot gets thick. We'll crack this puzzle quick as a click. Mugshot Mysteries, we're on the trail. Twists and turns that never fail. Laughs and chills, it's quite the show. Who did it? Tune in to know. Follow the breadcrumbs through the haze. Every clue's a piece in this crazy maze. Fun and thrills wrapped in crime. You'll love it every single time. Mugshot Mysteries.